Hollywood, a world of shimmering lights, dazzling gowns, flashing cameras, and dreams spun into celluloid. For audiences, it has always been a place of magic, where our favorite stars seemed untouchable, immortal, almost godlike. We watched them fall in love on screen, fight epic battles, sing unforgettable songs, and live larger-than-life stories that made us believe in forever. But Hollywood has always had two faces. One, the glamorous facade the studios wanted us to see. The other, the hidden world of secrets, scandals, and private battles that never made it onto the silver screen. And in the late 20th century, one of the darkest shadows ever cast over Hollywood wasn't a scandal at all. It was a disease. A disease that struck silently at first, misunderstood and ignored, but soon revealed itself as an epidemic that would take millions of lives worldwide. AIDS. In the 1980s and 90s, the AIDS crisis didn't just devastate families and communities. It shook the very foundation of Hollywood. The industry that had built its reputation on beauty, perfection, and fantasy suddenly faced a brutal reality that its brightest stars were not immune. And when the truth finally came out, the impact was seismic. Tonight, we remember 7 legends. 7 men who defined an era, who embodied everything that Hollywood represented: glamour, talent, power, vulnerability, and humanity. They lived extraordinary lives, gave the world unforgettable performances, and then faced the most devastating of endings. Their deaths were not just tragedies. They were wake-up calls. They forced society to look at AIDS differently, to see the faces behind the headlines, to grieve, and eventually, to act. This is not just a story about loss. It's a story about courage, about silence and stigma, about love and legacy. These are the stories of 7 Golden Age Hollywood stars who tragically died of AIDS, and whose lives continue to remind us that even the brightest lights can burn out too soon. If Hollywood ever had a perfect leading man, it was Rock Hudson. He looked like he had been sculpted straight out of the American dream, standing 6'4", broad-shouldered, with dark hair, piercing eyes, and a voice that could melt an audience with just a few words. He was handsome in the way old movie posters promised men could be. He was elegant yet rugged, tender yet strong. Hudson wasn't born into stardom. He was born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in Winnetka, Illinois, in 1925. His childhood was far from glamorous. His father abandoned the family, his stepfather was abusive, and young Roy spent much of his early life longing for escape. He found it in the movies. Sitting in darkened theaters, he admired the actors who seemed larger than life, the men who never doubted themselves, the women who adored them, the worlds that looked nothing like his own. When he returned from serving in the U.S. Navy during World War II, he chased that dream with everything he had. He drove to Hollywood with little more than his looks and determination, and it was those looks that got him noticed. A talent scout introduced him to Henry Wilson, a notorious agent in Hollywood's golden age, who specialized in creating stars. Wilson believed Roy Scherer needed a new name, something simple, bold, and unforgettable. And so, Rock Hudson was born. From the late 1940s into the 1950s, Rock Hudson rose quickly. He was cast in westerns, melodramas, and romances, learning on the job, improving with each film. His breakthrough came with Magnificent Obsession in 1954, a Douglas Sirk melodrama that made audiences weep and critics take notice. 2 years later, All That Heaven Allows cemented his status as the ultimate romantic hero. And then came Giant in 1956, alongside Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean, a sprawling epic that earned Hudson an Academy Award nomination. By then, he wasn't just a movie star. He was a legend in the making. To the public, Rock Hudson represented the epitome of masculinity. He was paired on screen with Doris Day in a series of romantic comedies like Pillow Talk and Lover Come Back. Their chemistry was effortless, playful, and electric. Women swooned. Men admired him, and magazines proclaimed him the most desirable man in the world. But off-screen, the story was different. Rock Hudson was gay. In an era when even whispers of homosexuality could destroy a career, he was forced to live in secrecy. Hollywood was ruthless about maintaining illusions. Studios arranged dates with actresses, staged photographs with beautiful women, and carefully crafted stories to keep the truth hidden. Gossip columnists, some of whom knew the truth, played along, and Hudson, caught between his personal identity and his public persona, played the role he was given. Imagine the burden. To be admired by millions, to be the dream of countless fans, but to never fully be yourself. For decades, Hudson lived under that weight, smiling for cameras while guarding his private life with silence. By the early 1980s, however, silence was no longer enough. A mysterious disease was spreading in the United States. It was called AIDS. At first, it was ignored, dismissed as something affecting only the fringes of society. The media treated it with cruelty, politicians stayed silent, and fear festered in ignorance. But then, everything changed. In July 1985, Rock Hudson made an announcement that shocked the world. He had AIDS. This was not just another Hollywood story. It was a seismic cultural moment. For the first time, AIDS had a face, and not just any face. It had the face of one of the most beloved men in Hollywood, a star who had embodied strength, charm, and idealized masculinity for decades. The news stunned fans and rattled the entertainment industry. Here was Rock Hudson, the ultimate leading man, suddenly frail, gaunt, and visibly ill. He collapsed in Paris in 1984, and when he returned to the U.S., speculation about his health grew. The truth, when confirmed, forced the public to confront AIDS not as an abstract fear, but as a real human tragedy. It was no longer something that could be dismissed as someone else's problem. Hudson's revelation had profound ripple effects. His close friend Elizabeth Taylor, who had starred alongside him in Giant, was devastated but inspired. She channeled her grief and anger into activism, founding the American Foundation for AIDS Research, AMFAR. She became one of the most influential advocates in the fight against the epidemic, raising hundreds of millions of dollars. None of it might have happened without Rock Hudson's bravery in making his diagnosis public. Even President Ronald Reagan, who had largely avoided addressing the crisis, was finally pressured to speak out. Hudson's illness had forced the White House to confront the epidemic, albeit belatedly. On October 2, 1985, Rock Hudson passed away at the age of 59. His death was heartbreaking, but it was also transformative. He became a symbol not of shame, but of awareness. In his final act of courage, by simply telling the truth, Rock Hudson helped change the course of history. Today, when we remember Rock Hudson, we remember more than just a movie star. We remember a man who carried a heavy burden with grace, who entertained millions, and who, in his final chapter, gave the world something greater than a performance. He gave them honesty. He turned his personal tragedy into a catalyst of compassion, awareness, and change. His films still sparkle with old Hollywood magic. His image remains iconic. But his legacy, the one that truly matters, is written in the progress made against a disease that once seemed unstoppable. Rock Hudson was the first major celebrity to say, "This is real. This can happen to anyone. And it has happened to me." In doing so, he saved lives. Rock Hudson may have left us too soon, but he will never be forgotten. If Rock Hudson was the face of classic romantic Hollywood, Anthony Perkins was its darker, more mysterious shadow. Tall, boyish, with a disarming smile and nervous energy, Perkins was one of those actors who seemed to reveal everything and hide everything at the same time. Born in New York City in 1932, Perkins grew up in the shadow of his father, a stage and film actor who died when Anthony was just 5 years old. The loss left a void that Perkins carried for the rest of his life. Sensitive, awkward, and yearning for belonging, he found solace in acting. His early roles in the 1950s showed promise. He was cast as a sensitive young man in Friendly Persuasion, 1956, earning an Academy Award nomination. Hollywood had found someone different from the usual square-jawed heroes. Perkins wasn't the macho type. He was vulnerable, complicated, and intriguingly offbeat. But it was in 1960 that Anthony Perkins found his destiny and his curse. Cast by Alfred Hitchcock in Psycho, Perkins became Norman Bates, the shy motel owner with a sinister secret. It was a performance that would define his career and forever link his name with horror history. Norman Bates was terrifying precisely because Perkins made him human, sad, conflicted, almost sympathetic. While Psycho made him immortal in cinema, it also typecast him. For years, he struggled to escape the shadow of Norman Bates. Hollywood had trouble seeing him as anything else. And yet, Perkins kept working, on stage, on television, and in European films where he was freer to experiment. Behind the scenes, Perkins was hiding his own truth. Like Rock Hudson, he was a gay man in an industry and an era where being openly homosexual could destroy a career. He dated men discreetly, navigating a world of secrecy and fear. Then, surprisingly, in the 1970s, he married Berry Berenson, a photographer and actress. They had 2 sons, and by all accounts, it was a happy marriage built on love and respect. But in the 1980s, AIDS began to cast its long shadow. Perkins contracted the virus, though he kept his illness private for years. In 1990, he reprised Norman Bates one last time in Psycho 4, the beginning already weakened by illness. By 1992, AIDS had taken its toll. Perkins passed away on September 12, 1992, at just 60 years old. After his death, his widow Berry revealed a statement he had written. There are many who believe this disease is God's vengeance, but I believe it was sent to teach people how to love, to learn compassion, and to stop judging. Those words, tender and brave, capture the essence of Anthony Perkins. He had lived a life of complexity, of contradictions, of roles both on screen and off. In the end, his honesty and his artistry remain his true legacy. If Rock Hudson was the face of Hollywood's leading man and Anthony Perkins the eternal outsider, Liberace was pure spectacle. Few performers in history embodied showmanship the way he did. With his sparkling costumes, candelabra-topped pianos, and a smile as wide as a stage, Liberace wasn't just an entertainer. He was a phenomenon. Born Vladziu Valentino Liberace in 1919 in Wisconsin, he showed musical talent at a young age. By the time he was a teenager, he was a virtuoso pianist, dazzling audiences with his speed, precision, and flair. But Liberace wanted more than to be a classical pianist. He wanted to entertain. He wanted to charm. He wanted to be unforgettable. In the 1950s, he found his niche, blending classical piano with pop tunes, Broadway showstoppers, and outrageous comedy. His television program, The Liberace Show, made him a household name. Audiences adored his combination of talent and campy humor. And then there were the costumes, sequin capes, feathered outfits, diamond-encrusted rings. He joked about his extravagance, famously saying, "Too much of a good thing is wonderful." Critics mocked him, but audiences couldn't get enough. Liberace became one of the highest-paid entertainers in the world. He sold out arenas in Las Vegas, toured internationally, and was adored by millions. But behind the glitz and glamour was a man who fought to keep his private life private. Rumors about his sexuality swirled for decades, but Liberace sued newspapers that claimed he was gay and publicly denied the allegations. By the mid-1980s, however, Liberace's health was failing. He grew thin, pale, and visibly unwell. He insisted it was anemia or a watermelon diet. But the truth came out only after his death on February 4th, 1987. Liberace had died of AIDS-related pneumonia. For many fans, the revelation was shocking. They had believed his denial for years. But for others, it was a sad confirmation of what they had long suspected. Liberace's death was one of the earliest high-profile AIDS deaths in entertainment. And though he had hidden his illness, his passing forced the public to reckon with the reality of AIDS once again. His flamboyance, his charm, and his unapologetic love of excess live on is a reminder that artistry comes in many forms, and sometimes the brightest lights burn out too soon. For millions of Americans, Robert Reed was a perfect father. As Mike Brady on the Brady Bunch, he was kind, wise, and endlessly patient. He was the dad everyone wished they had. But the man behind the role lived a much more complicated life. Born in Illinois in 1932, Reed discovered acting in college and pursued it with passion. He trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London before returning to the United States to work in theater and television. In the 1960s, he gained recognition on The Defenders, a legal drama, but it was his role on the Brady Bunch starting in 1969 that made him a household name. For 5 seasons, Reed played the patriarch of America's most famous blended family. His performance was warm, reassuring, and beloved. Yet, privately, Reed struggled. He was a serious actor who often disliked the light-hearted scripts of the Brady Bunch. He argued with producers and longed for more dramatic work. But even greater than his professional frustrations was his personal secret. Reed was gay, a truth he kept hidden from the public for fear it would destroy his career. In the late 1980s, Reed was diagnosed with HIV. He kept his illness quiet, telling only close friends. On May 12, 1992, he died of AIDS-related cancer at the age of 59. When news broke, it stunned fans who had grown up watching him on television. The revelation of his private life, his sexuality and his illness, sparked conversations about how Hollywood had forced so many to live in secrecy. Robert Reed may have played the perfect dad on screen, but in real life, he was a man caught between expectation and reality. His death was another reminder that age respected no boundaries, no roles, no illusions. Denholm Elliott was one of those rare actors whose presence made every scene feel richer. He wasn't the matinee idol, nor the flashy star, but the kind of actor who disappeared into his characters so completely that you forgot you were watching someone perform. You believed him, always. Born in London in 1922, Elliott grew up in a Britain caught between tradition and change. His early years were marked by discipline and service. During World War II, he joined the Royal Air Force, training as a wireless operator and gunner. But in 1942, while serving in North Africa, his plane was shot down. He survived, but was captured and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Silesia, where he remained until the war ended. Those years of captivity would shape him, giving him both resilience and a deep understanding of human fragility. After the war, Elliott pursued acting, training at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. His early career was steady rather than spectacular, with stage and film roles that built his reputation as a dependable, nuanced performer. But by the 1960s and 70s, he had become one of Britain's most respected character actors. What made Elliott special was his ability to bring warmth, wit, and a touch of eccentricity to every role. He had a way of making even the smallest parts unforgettable. He could play the fool, the rogue, the dignified gentleman, or the fragile soul, often all at once. In the 1980s, he became internationally famous for a string of standout performances. In Trading Places, 1983, he delighted audiences with his sharp comedic timing. In A Room with a View, 1985, he brought depth to a portrayal of Mr. Emerson, winning a BAFTA for Best Supporting Actor. And, of course, he became a beloved part of the Indiana Jones franchise as Marcus Brody, the bumbling but lovable museum curator. Fans adored his mix of intelligence, humor, and vulnerability. But behind the career triumphs, Elliott lived a private life that was far more complicated. He identified as bisexual and, unlike many of his contemporaries, was relatively open about it within his personal circles. In an era when openness could cost careers, his quiet authenticity was both courageous and risky. In the 1980s, Elliott contracted HIV. At the time, the diagnosis carried fear, stigma, and near-certain tragedy. Yet Elliott continued to wake, continuing to give audiences the characters they loved, even as he faces illness in private. On October 6, 1992, Denholm Elliott died of AIDS-related tuberculosis at the age of 70. His passing was mourned deeply in Britain and Hollywood alike. Elliott's widow, Susan Robinson, would later dedicate herself to raising awareness of AIDS, ensuring that his death, like his life, would serve a greater purpose. His colleagues remembered him not just as a brilliant actor, but as a generous spirit, someone who made sets lighter, warmer, better. Today, fans still smile when they see Marcus Brody blundering his way through Indiana Jones. They still admire the tenderness of his work in A Room with a View. And they still remember that Denholm Elliott lived authentically, with courage, at a time when it was far from easy. Howard Rollins was one of those rare performers whose talent was undeniable from the very first moment he stepped on screen. He had a presence, intense, intelligent, magnetic. When Rollins acted, you didn't just watch him, you felt him. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1950, Rollins grew up in a working-class family. His early years weren't easy, but he discovered acting in school and fell in love with it. Drama gave him purpose, a place to channel his energy and emotion. After studying theater formally, he began his career on television soap operas, but it didn't take long for Hollywood to come calling. In 1981, Rollins exploded onto the big screen in Ragtime, Milos Forman's sweeping adaptation of E.L. Doctorow's novel. As Colehouse Walker Jr., a black pianist whose life is torn apart by racism and injustice, Rollins delivered a performance of extraordinary power. He was graceful yet fiery, controlled yet devastatingly emotional. Critics hailed him as one of the finest young actors of his generation. The role earned him both an Academy Award nomination and a Golden Globe nod. 3 years later, Rollins starred in A Soldier's Story, 1984, further cementing his reputation. Again, he showed the world that he wasn't just talented, he was important. His performances gave voice to characters who demanded dignity, depth, and humanity. By the late 1980s, Rollins was a household name for his role in In the Heat of the Night, a television adaptation of the Oscar-winning film. As Detective Virgil Tibbs, Rollins brought intelligence and quiet strength to the role. Fans admired him, colleagues respected him, and it seemed his career had limitless potential. But behind the professional success was a storm. Rollins struggled with addiction. He had multiple arrests related to drug use, and those troubles began to erode his career. Hollywood, always quick to turn its back, started offering fewer roles. Still, his talent never faded. Then came the cruelest blow, an HIV diagnosis. In the 1990s, at the height of AIDS stigma, Rollins kept his illness mostly private. Yet it became clear that his health was declining. His once vibrant frame grew frail. His energy diminished. On December 8, 1996, Howard Rollins died of AIDS-related lymphoma at the age of 46. His passing was heartbreaking, not only because he was so young, but because his best work seemed still ahead of him. Colleagues remembered him as brilliant, complicated, and deeply human. Fans mourned the loss of a talent that Hollywood never fully appreciated. Howard Rollins' legacy endures in Ragtime, A Soldier's Story, and In the Heat of the Night. His performances remain alive, reminding us of what he gave in the short time he had, and of the countless stories he never got to tell. Freddie Mercury was more than a rock star. He was an icon, a force of nature, a man whose very existence redefined what it meant to be free. Born Ferrot Bolsra in 1946 on the island of Zanzibar, he moved with his family to England as a teenager. Shy, artistic, and different, he found his voice in music. In 1970, he formed a band with guitarist Brian May, drummer Roger Taylor, and later bassist John Deacon. They called themselves Queen. What followed was one of the most extraordinary careers in music history. With his soaring four-octave voice, flamboyant stage presence, and boundless charisma, Freddie Mercury became the ultimate frontman. He could hold an arena of 80,000 people in the palm of his hand. Queen gave the world some of the greatest rock anthems ever written: Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions, Somebody to Love. Each song carried Mercury's theatricality, his boldness, his genius. Their performance at Live Aid in 1985 is still regarded as the greatest live rock performance of all time. Mercury strutted across the stage at Wembley Stadium, commanding the audience with effortless power. In those 20 minutes, he didn't just perform, he transcended. But behind the spotlight, Mercury's health began to decline. In the late 1980s, rumors swirled about his appearance. He grew thinner, canceled public appearances, and speculation mounted. Mercury refused to confirm anything, choosing to protect his privacy and focus on creating music. Even as his health deteriorated, he recorded songs with Queen, pushing himself to deliver vocals that still astonish today. Finally, on November 23, 1991, Mercury released a statement. He had AIDS. He explained that he had kept his illness private to protect those close to him, but that the time had come to tell the truth. Just 24 hours later, he was gone. On November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury died at the age of 45. His death sent shockwaves around the globe. Millions mourned. Fans left flowers outside his home in London. Tributes poured in from artists, politicians, and admirers worldwide. But Mercury's legacy was far from over. His bandmates created the Mercury Phoenix Trust, raising millions for AIDS research and awareness. His life was retold in countless documentaries and celebrated in the Oscar-winning film Bohemian Rhapsody. His music, meanwhile, never faded. It still fills stadiums, still inspires new generations, still echoes with the power of his voice. Freddie Mercury's death was a tragedy, but his life was triumph. He lived boldly, sang fearlessly, and left a legacy that is nothing short of eternal. Hollywood's golden age and the decades that followed gave us stars who seemed untouchable, larger-than-life figures who represented perfection, beauty, and power. But the reality was far different. Behind the glamour and the carefully crafted images were human beings, vulnerable, complicated, and mortal. Rock Hudson, Anthony Perkins, Liberace, Robert Reed, Denholm Elliott, Howard Rollins, Freddie Mercury. 7 names, 7 lives cut short by AIDS. Each of them lived at a time when the disease carried unimaginable stigma. Each of them struggled, privately or publicly, with the weight of illness and silence. And each of them, in their own way, helped the world see AIDS differently. Rock Hudson put a familiar face to a disease the world wanted to ignore. Anthony Perkins left us with words of compassion instead of bitterness. Liberace, in his flamboyant glory, reminded us that joy and tragedy can exist side by side. Robert Reed showed us that even America's perfect dad could be touched by this cruel illness. Denholm Elliott lived authentically, inspiring others by example. Howard Rollins gave us performances that still burn with fire, even as his life was cut short. Freddie Mercury turned his pain into art, leaving music that will outlive us all. Their deaths were tragedies, but they were also catalysts. They helped bring awareness, compassion, and eventually progress. Today, thanks to medical advances, here is no longer a certain death sentence. Millions of lives have been saved, and that progress was built, in part, on the courage of those who came before. When we remember these stars, we remember not just their deaths, but their lives, the joy they brought, the art they created, the barriers they broke. Their light continues to shine, guiding us toward a future where tragedy turns into triumph, and where silence is replaced with truth. Because legends, even when gone, never truly die.